Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavang, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily number 34. This is the back and forth community show in which we discuss all good things about the upcoming expansion. Today, we're continuing along the topic of general things to do with the introduction of a new race with the XPAC, how the devs might do that mechanically, how they can leverage such a system to teaching a new wave of players about this game and expanding its user base and so on. Footage in the background is going to be a weird mix. In the morning, my PC was a nightmare, crashing worse than ever. In the evening, it was actually kind of stable and I managed to get some World vs. World. I'm also messing as well with the dynamic context UI stuff, which was an update I feel like I didn't give its fair due. And with the new XPAC End of Dragons, I kind of like the idea of having it enabled. Might make the footage a bit more immersive, might improve my experience with the game a bit. It's, again, just another new feature that maybe I can utilize, came in during the POF era, and maybe use it at the launch of a new XPAC. First comment here is from William Goss, who says, I would be satisfied with a new cosmetic and just start option for each race. The Echovald for the story, the further north Coden for the Norn, Canthan humans, that's obvious, but what the hey. Perhaps a Flame or Frost Legion char, and a yet unsurfaced Asuran faction, but I know these are quite a stretch. It would be a lot of content to introduce, plus it would need to tie into the main story. Yeah, I actually really like this idea as well, and I've kind of been inspired. Well, I don't even know if it's fair to say inspired. Basically, taking this idea from World of Warcraft retail. Like, I noticed that that's how WoW works now. You pick a race and you've got a sub-race that you can choose from. Had we mentioned this on an End of Dragons Daily earlier, or was it a stream? But I do think ArenaNet could do something like this. You know, if we are in a world where they end up adding a whole new race like the Tengu, and the point is that they have an alternate start and they begin the story a bit later, you could maybe do that for any number of the races, and essentially they're just new customization options with a bit of a different intro story. I could definitely see that. I could even see that getting filtered in gradually over Living World. I think a lot of what we talk about for End of Dragons are actually brilliant ideas for getting people super invested in Living World, which is the other side of the coin with this franchise that we've seen, you know, Icebrood Saga struggling with, and is worth thinking about. I'll come back to this idea in a minute when we talk about classes in a second, prompted by one of your other questions today. But yeah, I do think there's sub races. I actually think you've been pretty good with some selections here. Just off the top of my head, the way I would do it, if we were doing this for like Cantha or whatever, the Sylvari are the easiest. I think there would be a new form of Sylvari that you could add, and they would be Sylvari of the Echovald Forest. And maybe the name would just simply be Wardens, or maybe they'd have another name, because of course there are actually Wardens in the Caledon Forest too. That's what the Sylvari, probably not by coincidence, ended up deciding to call the protectors of the Caledon Forest and the Pale Tree. So maybe they'd have a new name, but I really like the idea of much more Entish Sylvari. You know how a lot of the Mordrum Guard ended up feeling kind of Entish as well, but obviously they're definitively bad guys. I like the idea of going with that, but with this new branch, that would be really good. Fits very well. The idea of being able to start as a new form of Norn, one that is estranged from the Norn of the North, is very cool. I actually like the idea of Norn from the South Pole, or Norn that many hundreds or thousands of years ago had settled at the south, so they're super different from their northern brothers. But there's actually a lot of mysteries about where the Norn came from, and whether they have any connection to the Coden and so on, that maybe you could dive into with this expansion, or the subsequent Living World afterwards, that would be really fun, and a new branch of Norn to pick from, that were living in Cantha because they had migrated north, as opposed to the Norn of the Shiver Peaks that had migrated south. Now, I would be really on board with that, and I would suggest as well that whatever this new variety of Norn was, they would have different transformations. I always look back at when the original Guild Wars 2 trailer came out. There was this amazing shot of Aerster Galkin fighting alongside a Coden, but the Coden weren't established in lore yet. They were in the trailer, but the devs had never told us who or what they were. So my immediate impression when I watched that trailer as it was new was to think, wow, in Guild Wars 2, you'll be able to become polar bears. Not just regular bears like werebears, but you'll be able to become this polar bear guy. How cool is that? And then in the end, it was a Coden, it was a different race, and so on and so on and so on. Well, maybe now we do get, you know, a polar bear transformation and stuff. And of course, that's going to lead us all to thinking about making the transform skills and stuff better. Maybe that's another topic, though. For humans, I mean, I definitely mentioned this concept before. I really think the Awakened is such a great idea. I know that the Awakened don't necessarily have any stake in this upcoming story, but who cares, man? Do it anyway? I don't know. Maybe this is a bit out there, but that really was the most perfect opportunity. Have varieties of humans that are awakened. In a weird way, we're kind of talking about a whole new race, I think, here, though, which is undead. And if you're going to have, like, sub-races to choose from, imagine a world, like, 7 years from now, where Guild Wars 2 is adding both new races and sub-races. Maybe you do the Awakened at that point under an undead umbrella. You know, you'd have the undead, and you'd have maybe the Unchained, and you'd have maybe the Awakened on there, and then maybe you'd have Ghosts as well. You know, they're three pretty clean ideas of undead that maybe could have formed sentience over time to varying degrees, and you're playing as them. I don't know. Asura I actually find kind of difficult, because, yeah, you can go with the idea of, like, Ratanovans or whatever, you know, people that escaped from the city, people that just stayed underground the whole time. Subterranean Asura, I get it. But, like, why are they fun? I don't know. Maybe there could be some big grand story about how they've got some parallel technology going on that's more advanced than the surface dwellers. But I'm just not too inspired by this. Maybe the closest I can go is that perhaps these subterranean Asura still look like Guild Wars 1 Asura, which means they're a lot thinner, they're a lot more sharply angled, their eyes are smaller and blacker, and generally they're not cute. Which is what I kind of fell in love with in Guild Wars 1. They really softened them for the sequel because, you know, it's more marketable. And then they justified it in the lore by saying, oh, they've come to the surface, so their eyes changed, and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, maybe you do this other variation. I don't think it's that strong. As for the chart as well, that's kind of difficult, but you mentioned the Frost Legion. I kind of believe that Frost Legion will be gone by the end of Icebreed Saga. I don't think Jormag's going to be around in the capacity of an ally, especially since Champions 2. I mean, really. So I don't believe in Frost Legion. However, Flame Legion kind of. Now, Flame Legion is not a race. And in a way, I guess the underground Asura isn't really a race. But here's the thing that I think they could go with. That's the Flame Forged. You know, there was this ritual whereby Char transformed their bodies, and you could fight a lot of Flame Forged even in Corteria. But because they were always associated with the Flame Legion, that meant they were bad guys. So you never really got to talk to them very much or think much about it. Now, though, the Flame Legion are on our side, and we have allied Flame Forged just sort of milling around sometimes. So maybe they should be playable. Then it's weird, though, because we're kind of just like saying it's a race but fiery. And I don't know whether that works too well. But look, the whole concept I'm on board with. These are just some ideas off the top of my head that they could put out for existing lore. They can obviously write a ton of new stuff that's even more compelling. Speaking of transformations with the Norn and the racial skills, Strawberry says, imagine ArenaNet reworking race abilities via the mastery system and making them actually useful. Since it would be weird if, for example, they gave only the Tengu useful abilities, or if they have to make a set of bad abilities for the new race. Well, I have kind of, my gut, right, is that if they did a new race, it might just not have any racial abilities at all. You know, like how in Heart of Thorns, when they released the Revenant, it didn't get access to any racial skills. You know, that was one of the ways in which it felt very rushed and crunched. And you might say, oh, but it's a different world now, WP, you know? Maybe they'll spend more time on it. Look at how amazingly they did mounts. Well, hold on. Is it a different world? Because in a lot of ways, the development of End of Dragon seems to be mirroring the development of Heart of Thorns in terms of there have been some sudden decisions to get a lot of people on it quickly, so you never know, right? I do like to think, this whole race thing, I really like to think that it's like the mount thing. You know, mounts, they really worked their asses off and did something so amazing, and it had the time, and it had the space to really breathe and be a great feature. I've discussed in some of these recent videos how it could have gone further, but it was still great, right? I would like to think that the implementation of a new race with this XPAC would be similar, but you never know. It might be something a little bit more like the Revenant in Heart of Thorns, which could have had a lot more. However, if they do end up adding new racial skills, I do think, and I hadn't really considered this until I read your message, it kind of is a perfect opportunity to look at their function within the game, isn't it? All racial abilities. And decide what you're doing with them in terms of should players be able to have fun with these to any degree, really. Especially under modern power creep. A lot of those racial skills have just fallen further and further and further away. So, yeah, maybe you will see a bit of a philosophy shift from them, which allows them to do some interesting updates, and then the new Tengu stuff that came in, or the Largo stuff, or whatever that came in, would have a little bit more value. All of that said, I don't think it's the mastery system. The mastery system is not a good idea. One of my oldest suggestions, and I remember making this video, people like really rebelled against this, but I believe it should be a specialization line. A racial specialization. You can choose between one of 5 or one of 6 if a new race came in. And depending on which race you specialize to, it gives you those skills. That way, you can have powerful Asura Golems, and you can have powerful Norn transforms, and you can have a powerful Charzuka, and it's okay to balance them powerful, because players aren't asked to make new characters. Like, I don't know whether I need to re-establish this. I feel like a lot of players forget why things are the way that they are in Guild Wars. These racial skills aren't weak by accident. They're weak on purpose, because ArenaNet hates the idea that a new player will get to level 80, hit some kind of dungeon meta or raiding meta or whatever, but for the launch philosophies, we are talking about dungeons, and be told by a friend, you're not allowed to play with us, you picked the wrong race. Sorry, you're an Asura. Asura don't get the Charzuka, and we need the Charzuka to kill Subject Alpha. So no, you can't join our group. And then that person feels like they got screwed over. That experience happened a lot in the classic era of 3D MMOs. And ArenaNet were the counterculture. They were rebelling against it. So they basically said, yeah, we'll add them, but we're going to have them deliberately weak so this problem doesn't arise. Which was always stupid, because then why did they add elite versions of them? And it's a mess, right? Which is why I'm an advocate for change here. My suggestion that they would be a new specialization that all players of any race can freely choose between allows them to be strong again, because you can't make a mistake. You just swap the specialization and you get given those skills. And yes, that tight tying of skills to races dies away a little bit, but you're gonna have to make that sacrifice if you want racial skills to be worthwhile and still fit within ArenaNet's philosophies of what an MMO should be. Philosophies you presumably bought into at some point when you started playing this franchise. So I would make that concession. 100% I would. And there's an extra perk to my suggestion that actually allows you to have racial traits too, which allow you to customize just a little bit more how those racial skills operate. You know, the same way that an elite specialization gives you new utility skills, the racial specialization gives you new utility skills. And maybe, you know, there's just a couple of traits. In my dream world, there's a racial specialization and there's an underwater specialization. That is my perfect world, and I think you could do more with the system. I think ArenaNet could. But again, where's the ambition for this stuff ever been? Mao here explains they really need to do something about teaching crowd control to new players. Also, reworking those for Heart of Thorns and the core game would be super important. I don't know what you mean by reworking for Heart of Thorns and the core game. I don't know what you mean. You've got to be careful with saying stuff like that as well, guys. I don't think sweeping revamps and reworks that take meticulous care and attention on all the, you know, QA and everything that would go into it across vast swathes of previous expansion content is ever going to come into the game. They didn't properly introduce CC. No one knew what the blue bar was for such a long time. It's a great mechanic, but they do need to fix it before they release End of Dragons. Alright, just a quick pause here. Look, I'm sympathetic to people who don't know about the break bar, but it's not that arcane. It is a lie to say no one knew what the blue bar was for such a long time. Maybe you didn't know, and maybe your friends didn't know, and that's fine. Maybe you weren't following all the information in the game. Maybe you were playing from a casual standpoint. But I promise you, if you were following and playing the game, when they added the break bars, they did explain it very well. And people did know where it was. And there are places you can go in-game during solo gameplay to figure it out. It's just too difficult, and a lot of that stuff was only really transparent for people enjoying Heart of Thorns press, and now that's died away. So look, I understand your problem, but let's not lie. A lot of people have always known what the blue bar was for. It wasn't added under mysterious circumstances. Anyway, a huge issue with it too is that while Heart of Thorns introduced the crowd control mechanic, there's still a lot of times where people are confused on whether to use it or not. Like in Verdant Brink, it's vital to use it to take on the Wyverns to increase DPS by a bunch. But then in the Auric Basin, you don't get to use it, and in Tangled Depths, you are not recommended to use it on the Chuck Gerrant to keep up consistent DPS. And then the Mouth of Morgemoth CC is so unbalanced, and you can cry about how much people shouldn't use CC, but they don't care care. I honestly don't blame it since the mechanic is so poorly explained and often people don't know what conditions and skills do crowd control at all. Even with the new elite specs, a new race or a whole class, CC IMO has to be reworked, rebalanced and properly explained like the dodge tutorial. And while we're on that, I also think they should put in a tutorial like that for the bounty mechanics. Now we've seen them move on from just Path of Fire bounties to other champions in Bureau Marches, for example. Just another thing they should do, think about before releasing the expansion. And Kind says 100% agree. Been playing this for a while without knowing what CC even was. I know that there's these people out there that don't know what crowd control is. I always have a bit of a weird moment when I read a comment like Kind's there, and I'm like, wow. People really, really, really don't know. It's because Guild Wars has got a ton of skills and it's very active combat. There's already a lot to focus on, and people really just end up getting quite spammy a lot of the time and are rewarded for being spammy, so they don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. Look, I agree that we do need a CC change. I think that this comment is a little bit too far, though. I don't think it needs a total rework. I do think it needs to be better explained, but in general, I like the way that the break bar mechanic works, and I think the only issue is when power creep makes things a little bit wonky. And ArenaNet just needs to be careful in future of how they deal with things. So here's the thing. Those examples you gave where it's beneficial to not break the bar, that is not by design. I can promise you that ArenaNet has never added a break bar thinking, oh yeah, we don't want people to break this. They have never added a break bar as a trap. They know how, like, tenuously their community even understands the mechanic and how badly it's been implemented. When they put break bars on the Chuck Garrett, the idea is that you break the bars so that he stops attacking you, which means that you've got more damage uptime on people that were otherwise suffering. He's standing still for that period of time where otherwise he might be charging around, and he gets that damage debuff. It's supposed to be beneficial to break the bar. However, because of the way that the meta ended up balanced, he actually stays more stationary if the bar never goes down, and so on, right? And that can happen. Sometimes it's beneficial to not do it. Yeah, you have the chaos at the mouth of Mordremoth where people try to time it just right. That's basically ArenaNet designing those specific events poorly. And I would just say try to avoid those going forwards. And do you know what? I mean, I haven't really sat down as I read your comment here and thought super deeply about it, but it's quite interesting to me that you didn't have a single POF example. And maybe you don't have an easy POF example because they're generally better. Now, look, there probably are examples in POF and beyond, but they're generally better because they don't try to make break bars as traps. And I would also say to anyone new, you just got to mouse over the break bar to see, generally speaking, what it will do a lot of the times. But yeah, look, I'm not going to argue with you guys. There needs to be more information about this. And I think another thing your comments kind of shown here, when you're asking for bounty tutorials, I don't personally agree we need bounty tutorials, but what I do think you've shown is that in truth, a lot of stuff in Guild Wars isn't well explained, ever. Even dodging. Dodging is like the classic example here. What was ArenaNet's solution to teaching people a little bit more about dodging? The dodge chests? Like you open one chest in Queensdale by having to dodge through the spike ring? A spike mechanic that never comes back and stuff. Like, come on, like, this is crazy. So yeah, I think that there does need to be something more for sure. And it's not just that initial explanation, it's constant reuse of the experience, as I said in the previous part. Oh my god, I got a mountain of questions. How have I been talking so long? I'll probably go shorter answers here. Rara says, I wonder in regards to implementing a Tengu voice in the existing personal story Living World, if they could use technology to transform an existing voice into Tengu male-female. Currently, when you meet the Tengu in the existing world, they have a tinny effect on them. Maybe it would change enough that they wouldn't have to produce completely new voicing. And Hardy says, yeah, I mean, how many people would notice a human VO lowered and added to like gravel, would know it wasn't Char? I mean, I guess it was into Fallout and Elder Scrolls territory where 5 voice actors play hundreds of NPCs. Yeah, I mean, we see ArenaNet does this technique, but I think there's more to it than that. If you listen to the Tengu, they speak with like this Asian-inspired kind of cadence and sort of, there's more to it than just a sound effect. But ArenaNet does it. The Char are a great example. Maybe this is a workaround, like a hybrid approach. If you're that desperate to have the Tengu access to the Battle of Claw Island and all that stuff, fine, but even though this would be like a universally applicable thing, there'd still be a lot of testing and stuff with it, and you couldn't add any effects that change like the tempo or the speed or anything, so I don't know how far this would really go. I think the easiest thing is to just not worry about implementing that part of a new race. Noct says, I've been playing a lot of BDO, and the concept of the first question mentioned is pretty much how BDO does classes. So we're talking about the idea of a new after these 9 elite specializations, you do a new class and you launch it with multiple elite specs immediately. Each class has a weapon in BDO, and once a certain level, they can choose between Succession, which is to keep that weapon but get stronger skills for it, or Awakening, which is get a whole new weapon you can swap dynamically to, which is kind of the concept of an elite spec. Think you get a warrior with a sword and shield, but an Awakening would give you the greatsword. And what do they do instead of adding a different weapon each class? They release a new class with its own Succession and Awakening, and the concept gets a lot of hype. They even do it as release the core classes, then release the options 2 weeks later. I can see Guild Wars 2 doing this, showcase the core classes, then elite spec 1, 2, then 3. This sounds fine, and I think if BDO has proven it as a concept, ArenaNet will be looking at it. And, you know, this really makes me realize as well, we were talking about the whole idea of living world. I honest to God think that they could release the core class with an expansion, and then the next 3 elite specializations for that class roll in over the next 9 months to year through Living World. I could definitely see that. And now you've got elite specs coming in Living World. They're all attached to the new class in the new expansion, but you've got it. Oh, those episodes would be so hype. Imagine that. And imagine if they're adding like legendary mounts and stuff at the same time. Oh, they could do a lot to get me invested in the next season. And listen, I don't just suggest the idea. We're in fantasy land right now. We're speculating. We can imagine they do whatever, right? And I'm now telling you, well, what if they slowly trickle them in? I'm not just telling you to imagine that because I'm trying to be considerate of all the studio efforts it would take to make a whole class plus elite specs and so on. It's not just that, but I think that by spreading them out, you allow each component to really be its own thing. Like, remember, they never added the Revenant on its own. They added it with the Herald, and you can kind of feel it's a bit empty. I mean, less so since some of the more recent patches, but you can feel that Core Rev feels a bit empty. I wouldn't want that for the new classes. I would really want them to feel fully fleshed out, so to speak. And then you've got another reason, an argument for this, which I've always had, and that's actually balance. You know, when End of Dragons comes out, the raiding balance scene is going to be completely thrown out of the window. The PvP scene is going to be completely thrown out of the window. The World vs. World scene is going to be completely thrown out. Anything you currently enjoy about the current build system is probably going to go away for a good while, if not forever, because the new elite specs are going to wash it all, are going to be the main thing. And ArenaNet are going to balance them to be stronger, deliberately so that they feel satisfying and worthwhile to pay into the expansion for a while. That's just the smartest way for them to do it. They're not going to be able to put them in, or 9 new things at once, and have it all in perfect tandem and balance with what existed before. They just can't. However, if you imagine a world where they were slowly trickling stuff in, you know, all they're adding is the Scourge this patch, and then they can assess how the Scourge fits, and then they can shuffle everything and make sure it's clean. Now they're going to add the Mirage, and they can shuffle and tweak. Now they're going to add the Firebrand, and so on. In this world, you actually can still preserve what was once upon a time great, and continue to add on top of it. And so a little bit of that, even with a new class concept, I like a lot. Flip K with a side comment. Hey, WP, do you know if you're going to be one of the retailers for End of Dragons, just like you were for POF? I was Heart of Thorns as well, for what it's worth. I recall correctly, we just needed to click your link and we were transferred to the website. The price was the same for us, but it would be supporting your work. I think all of us would find this satisfying. And PS, what do you think? Will we get a physical edition of the expansion or just digital? So the devs haven't announced any of that stuff, so I can't talk about it. I don't have a clue. And even when I do become privy to some of those things, I probably won't be able to say until later, closer to the XPAC launch. But, you know, I hope so. As for a physical edition, it's funny, reading your comment saying this was the first I've thought about this for ages. I guess I've been defeated, guys. I don't believe they'll do it really anymore. How long have I been asking for the return of collector's editions and just kind of that sense of having a physical thing? I think we're past it. I really don't expect it to happen with End of Dragons. It didn't with POF, so why would it here, right? For those that don't know, they did actually do boxes for Heart of Thorns, but no collector's edition. Here we have a comment about something that I think a lot of people are confused on. I'd like to set straight. Andraz Bal says, is anything confirmed for this new XPAC? Everyone seems so confident with ideas for elite specs and new race. Are we even getting those? So there is no confirmation at all, or even any real significant hinting at all about a new race. That it could very easily not be one. I had someone else message me about this as well. And yeah, we've been talking very confidently about it in these past 2 videos. That's because, what do you want? Every 5 seconds, I've got to say, oh, it might not happen. You know, come on. That would just bag down the discussion too much. Yeah, that is not confirmed. However, elite specializations kind of are. On one of the developer live streams during like these COVID days when they were doing it from home, they kind of casually mentioned that they were designing elite specializations. It was kind of said as a bit of an aside. It did not look like something that they were meant to really be announcing or whatever. And there was no more information than that. There was just a suggestion that they were designing elite specs. So I think it's very, very likely we will be getting those. And I think it's really important we get those too. I would actually even put them even more important than a new race, just as much as keeping the vets happy. A new expansion without elite specs, they would lose a lot of sales from vets on that. A lot. I think they gotta do it. Mass V2P2 says, I think it's... Now, this is a crazy comment, guys. Get ready. Here we go to today's craziness. I think it's possible they have already recorded Tengu voice lines 10 years ago for the core story and for the new expansions as well. It's possible that they have planned adding the race down the line from the get-go and have already been working on it for years. Absolutely not. Come on, man. The only thing we really know, and this is from the Guild Wars 2 art book, speaking of the collector's edition, is that they were at one point planning on the Tengu. They really were. It was going to be in the game. But then early on in development, at some point during development, they realized it was going to be too much work. They didn't do it. And a lot of what they were thinking of for Tengu got re-rolled into what ended up being Sylvari's storylines. That's it. And it's always struck me that this was very early on in development and very little actual tangible Tengu stuff was made. The first comment that they've been sitting on these lines for the whole personal story, like they cast someone and everything we don't even know, is crazy. Then the idea that someone's been on the payroll secretly recording Tengu lines for an update they don't know if or when they'll ever get round to. And only now that we're going to Cantha, suddenly they've decided the time is... This is insane. Truly insane. No chance. And you'll know, even through this absurdity, you haven't resolved or addressed the idea of living world. What, they paid someone to do the XPACs, but not living world either? Or were they doing it all, were they? Crispy says, I can see a world where two classes share an elite. An arcane archer, some kind of mesmer guardian mix, perhaps, and so on. It's ArenaNet. They can come up with some new ridiculous name for that and call it a day. Yeah, I actually think this is very viable as well. A post-elite specialization concept or adding new ones. I do think shared specializations can be a thing. Give it a flashy new name, some kind of twist or gimmick that ultimately doesn't correspond to a lot of dev work. And yeah, you can have them share, you know, maybe the heavies share, the lights, the mediums, whatever you want. And it's actually still really compelling. You guys might look at that as lazy and boring, but for people who are super into the buildcraft, this would be really fascinating. It's like the idea of taking the fire magic specialization from Ellie and dumping it over on Warrior. So Warriors now have the fire magic spec and maybe some spells. You know, this is how Guild Wars 2 could bring multi-professions back. And in a world where they're doing that sort of thing, which I do think is credible, then they can also add whole new specializations that get shared too. And how a Guardian would utilize fire magic is very different to how an engineer would utilize fire magic and what skills it could combo with and so on. The thing is, with all the existing specializations, they're all very carefully made for the precise class that they're talking about and have specific integrations with like skill types and stuff that are exclusive to classes. So I think it's actually way more work to refactor current specializations and trade them around than it is to make a whole new thing that is designed from the beginning to be shared between, you know, say the Rev and the Necro together. You know, some kind of new demon summoning thing and multiple classes get it at once. I do think this is very, very credible. I'm not honestly expecting this for End of Dragons itself, but if it was to come in End of Dragons, I can see that they would make it work right here, right now. Last, just a comment I want to highlight. There really isn't much for me to add, and it's not a question, but I think everyone should hear this. Because we forget this too regularly, and I've seen a few people with similar sentiments in some of these recent videos. Felmild says, so much stuff that came with Heart of Thorns, raids, an overhaul of fractals, the mastery system, the whole idea of elite specs, a new class, the modern process for crafting legendaries, the collection system, and way, way more. The maps, the storyline, etc. In Path of Fire, we were way more refined, but in large part, Guild Wars 2 today is largely built on stuff that was introduced either directly as a part of Heart of Thorns or as a part of system overhauls preparing to separate core from expansion. By comparison, Path of Fire is basically an uber-polished, refined Living World season plus mounts. The storyline, maps and mounts were all super well done, but compared to Heart of Thorns, the expansion and changes that came as a result of PoF is just tiny compared to Heart of Thorns. Heart of Thorns revived Guild Wars and gave it years of life. PoF was really well done and fun on its own, but had very little in terms of adding lasting appeal to the game outside of the storyline content itself. I think this guy's right. I really do. There's a lot of very high quality system work that went on with Heart of Thorns that isn't credited anymore. And I just really want you guys to think about everything that person's listed out here. Now imagine End of Dragons had similar ambitions for like fundamental reworks about the way that progression is looked at in the game and all the big systems we interface with. Now that is an ambitious expansion. All this said, I don't think we'll get that. I think it's going to be, once again, an uber polished Living World season plus a big feature. And it won't be mounts this time. I think it'll be a race. But even End of Dragons will still owe a lot of its success and fun to Heart of Thorns, which put the systems in there in the first place. And if on those grounds you guys voted that Heart of Thorns was the superior expansion, I think, you know, that's a very honourable and decent thing to do. It's kind of looking a lot past your immediate moment-to-moment enjoyment and at something far deeper about the MMO. Well, there you have it, guys. Let's move on from this topic now. Thank you so much to all the people contributing, and I'll still be reading your lingering thoughts. Let's throw up a new one. I'll just say as we close out the video again here that if you are interested in listening to tomorrow's episode right now, it's on Patreon already. There's a link at the top of the description. And for the next topic, I got a big one for you. Why is it called End of Dragons? Now look, I know the idea is that we're closing out of this story arc, but what does that actually look like? What is the End of Dragons? You got your lore speculation and story ideas? Let's jump in on that. Thank you all. Give it a real thought. Drop your comments below, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care now, everyone.